Hello and welcome to our show. This is your show, Choose Africa on Air. I'm Eliasu, journalist and TV host, and it is my pleasure to have you here today. I'm joined here on stage by Vincent. Over to you. Hello, Ele. Hello to each and everyone who are joining us. I'm Vincent Edin, journalist at Uzbek Enrica, and we focus on the future. But here we are today, 2021, at the Carrousel du Louvre in Paris. It's a fantastic venue, and we're going to be spending 2.5 hours together to talk about development aid. But let's go back, 2018, Ouagadougou. The French President Emmanuel Macron took a decision. He said he was going to increase development aid through innovation and entrepreneurship with a massive program of aid going to small and medium-sized enterprises in Africa called Choose Africa. It is unlike any other program that is going to run up until 2022 and is going to support 16,000 companies, small and mid-sized companies. So this is an initiative kicked off by AFD but carried by its subsidiary Proparco that is available to startups, VSEs, SMEs across the African continent and has been running for some 3 years. We'll be looking at it over today's show. We'll also be seeing exactly where this financial help is going to, how it is used, and how it really helps drive development across the African continent. 2020, COVID hit, so AFD had to adapt how it did its business, but instead of changing what it did, it completely overhauled its offer. It in fact brought more money to the table, not just 2.5 billion, but 3.5 billion euros all in all through its Choose Africa Resilience program, and we'll be talking about that quite a bit today. We'll also talk about digitization, because that is a huge driver for further digitization throughout the continent. And obviously, we're going to keep going through what we're looking at today. The third part of today's show will focus on exactly how aid brought by Choose Africa is felt at all stages of a company's life. And it's not just financial aid. So we'll be looking at how Proparco provides financial aid, yes, to as many people as possible, but also without discrimination. And we will see how Choose Africa focused on inclusion, one of its key values. And we will show that through its commitment to driving women entrepreneurship. And one final word, because this is an interactive session, we want to hear from you. Send in your comments, your questions, because we have people here today who can provide expert advice. So we have companies, partners, people joining us live here in the studio or also by satellite. And thanks to satellite, obviously we've all been using satellite technology during COVID, we're quite familiar with it now, so please send in your questions via that so that we can answer those questions. We've already fielded some and we'll have some live during the show. So that's it for the show. Let's go. For this first part of the show, we have with us Gregory Clement. Hello. Hello, Vincent and Ele. Gregory, thank you for joining us. Before we sit down and chat with you, we have just a few videos that we'd like to look at, because who better than business owners themselves, those people who have been supported by Choose Africa, to speak about the program. Let's hear what they have to say.
The new Africa, we want to be people who lead changes, positively contributing to the way of the world develop.
And it's an incredible validation for us of what we're doing to have an investment from Proparco and, frankly, a great vote of confidence.
C'est dans ce contexte-là, effectivement, que l'arrivée de Proparco et de l'AFD est salutaire pour nous, puisque ça va nous permettre finalement d'avoir de la liquidité qu'on va réinjecter au sein des PME dans un contexte effectivement où c'était de plus en plus difficile pour eux d'accéder au crédit.
I see myself opening one of the biggest construction companies in Zambia, maybe in Africa.
And Proparco, thankfully, has been one of our supporters right from the beginning.
Donc on peut dire que nous avons un impact dans le développement de la région.
I know I'm going to do better, which is going to help the economy.
La microfinance ou le microcrédit redonne le pouvoir aux femmes.
On serre la ceinture ensemble
quand ça va mal et quand ça va bien, on est ensemble.
We realized how much Proparco has adopted the French government's policy of Choose Africa, which it is really promoting.
Fantastic comments there from all the people that we'll be hearing from throughout today's show, 2.5 hours long. Gregory, just to start off, we've seen these first comments about Choose Africa, and it's very tangible. It really is tangible, and we can see it through all of the comments we just heard. Because this is the tangible form of initiative that was kicked off by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, back in 2019 to give 2.5 billion euros to VSEs and SMEs throughout Africa between 2019 and 2022. So it's a strong commitment that we see there. And through these comments that we just heard, each in their own way, they highlight the role that private sector companies can play in Africa. And our role as a financial institution, development institution, we are there to provide assistance to these people, these project runners, to businesses, by giving them what they need to be able to deal with the challenges that face the African continent. So we saw that some of the challenges are access to water, energy, basic services, utilities, and here we have business leaders, men, women throughout Africa, and our aim is to be there to support them. Thank you for giving us that context, but let's talk about you. Let's talk about Proparco, that you are the head of. So again, it is a subsidiary of the AFD, but you finance the private sector. And AFD, or you are the ones who run Choose Africa. Yes, so Proparco is the private sector subsidiary of the AFD, the French Development Agency. And last year, we rolled out 2 billion euros in funding. Proparco was a real player throughout 2020. And in fact, that's the second year running that we have been rolling out more than 2 billion euros. And again, this is what we do across all continents, Latin America, Asia, with a key focus on Africa. And another point I would really like to highlight here is that we cover all sorts of sectors. The main sector that we focus on is for infrastructure, base utilities, and obviously there is a great need for assistance there, especially in Africa. But we also invest through other means, through financial institutions, local banks. But we also invest in the agricultural industry, health, education. And these are the main sectors that we are involved in. For that, we have help from our parent company, the AFD. And the AFD is the public sector side of business, and they finance public policy, but we are the private sector side of business. So it's a marriage between the two, between public and private, and we really feed off each other quite well so that we can come up with the best, most suitable solutions. And that's especially the sort of feedback we get from the field. Gregory, can you tell us about why you chose the title, Choose Africa on Air? Is that because you want to show that Proparco is really has their finger on the pulse when it comes to Africa? Well, yes, we are very much in Africa, and we're involved in Africa. And Africa is very much a continent that's in motion. It is a dynamic continent. There's a fantastic youth sector in Africa. But there's also great momentum that is coming all throughout Africa in terms of innovation. There is fantastic entrepreneurship in Africa, and we are there to help carry that momentum forward. And I think we just saw it in these first few comments, and we'll hear more about that today during the show. And we are really there to drive that momentum forward. I think we really need to see these as great examples, success stories, to show that really Africa has everything at its disposal to be able to tap into its potential. We've got some fantastic ideas across the continent, project leads across the continent, and we are there to support all of them. I really believe that Africa today can be a main contributor to a new growth cycle, a sustainable growth style worldwide, and I think it's really quite exciting.
Thank you very much, Gregory. All this show will be bilingual. We'll turn to you just afterwards, but first, let's turn to Vera Songwe. Hello. You're here live with us. For those of us who don't know you, you're an economist and you know the African equation absolutely perfectly. Maybe first of all, as an introduction, why is it so important to support the development of African SMEs today?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Please.
Perfectly.
Wonderful. I think, first of all, I would like to recognize your CEO, Gregory Clement, who is with us today, and for all the work that Proparco is doing on the continent. I think three things. Across the world, when we look at job creation, which is probably the big question we're asking ourselves post the COVID-19 pandemic, how do we recover, how do we grow? It's usually the private sector that helps with job creation in developed advanced economies as well as in emerging market economies. So I think when we talk about supporting the private sector and SMEs, that's what we're doing. We're creating jobs. No time has it been more important to create jobs as it is today when we're coming out of a pandemic that has seen many people on the continent. We estimate about 100 million people would have lost their jobs. And so getting companies to have working capital, to have credit to continue to grow their business or to re-enter the market is particularly important.
I hear your point about the private sector, but why particularly investing into VSEs and SMEs? Is it because they are more dynamic than the others?
It is because they make up 80% of the jobs and productivity tissue of most economies. So the private sector, essentially in most economies, and in particular in the developing world, is mostly an SME sector. They are more dynamic because they are more amenable to movement, but they are also, as a friend of mine would say, every small and medium enterprise is the next big business of tomorrow. So you start with an incubation of a small business, a small idea, and then it grows. And so supporting private sectors is particularly important. It is also where you find a better gender balance. There's more women who own small and medium enterprise businesses. It's where you find the youth who are just coming out of school and are beginning to get into the private sector. So yes, there is a dynamism in the sector. Part of that dynamism, of course, is that they come in and they go, and we need to make sure that the good ones can stay with better financing.
Thank you so much, Vera. We appreciate your insight. Thank you for being with us today.
Gregory, back to you. Something that Proparco seems to have understood is that we can't just help the African continent from here in our offices in Paris. So for that you have 6 regional offices, 13 more specific local bureaus. So tell us a bit how it works. So yes, you're exactly right. We are very present locally, and we also are very closer to the continent. And over the few years we've been growing and driving that, and we are still building up our presence in the field. So to give you a few key figures, we actually have 420 staff members within Proparco.
A little over 90 are out there in the field. It's absolutely key, and that's our trademark. If we compare ourselves with our European partners, our counterparts, this is what makes us special. It's very important because we've been able to forge ties with a network of about 200 partners on the African continent, working through financial institutions, of course, and microfinance institutions, as well as investment funds. All those partners are parties to long-term partnership agreements with us, and we're able to work together in a climate of confidence, and this is what enables us to finance our targets, and these are corporates that we cannot reach on our own. For example, micro entrepreneurs with operations that are relatively small, 20,000, 30,000 euros in revenue. So it's an opportunity for us to potentiate our action, and we do this thanks to our local presence. And I do believe we provide added value. It's a guarantee for success, and also we work very closely with the local populations and economic stakeholders. I believe this is extremely valuable. Very good. Let me make sure I understand the Choose Africa offer. Could you describe the range of financial instruments available to you for supporting VSEs and SMEs growth in Africa? Yes, of course. In fact, the philosophy of Choose Africa is to support companies at every step throughout their development process. And to that end, we will use every financial tool available to us within the Proparco group. We start by supporting startups, very small companies, through so-called equity investments or venture capital. So that's the first stage of development. We are there to support the company as it takes its first steps. We then support it directly or indirectly through our partners using more traditional financing, whether short, medium, or long term. And these are instruments that work really well and are very much in line with Proparco's DNA. Of course, we have other products as well, such as guarantees or securities, and we back local banks so they can finance the economy and help economic stakeholders grow, help create jobs, but also protect jobs. And the COVID crisis has shown the specific relevance of security instruments. Then, once the company has reached sufficient critical mass, we may further strengthen its equity. And that's what we call private equity. I believe that we have a continuum of financial instruments that can be used to support SMEs and VSEs throughout their growth chain and trajectory. We touched upon that in the introduction. Choose Africa is an initiative that runs from 2018 to 2022, and this is 2021. And we're currently celebrating the program's 3-year anniversary. We're slightly past the halfway mark. This might be an opportunity to look at your early track record. Could you walk us through it? Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. This is indeed 2021, and the commitment runs from 2018 until 2022. Remember the figure? 2.5 billion euros has been earmarked for African VSEs, SMEs, and startups. I mentioned that as well today. We have a very positive balance sheet since we have already deployed a total of 2 billion euros. Now, this is important because the underlying reality is over 16,000 companies will receive support. It's extremely important. And I think this is commensurate with the challenges facing Africa. So 16,000 companies, as I said, and thousands of micro entrepreneurs. Because, well, particularly amid the crisis, we have strengthened our support for microfinance institutions so we can have a real impact on the population pool and key economic stakeholders. In particular, I think we're helping to maintain jobs. Of course, I have indicated that other instruments are being used by Proparco, and therefore, in the 2 billion euros already deployed, more than 400 million have been in the form of securities, and close to another 400 million in the form of shareholdings or equity investments. I'm giving you the ballpark figures, obviously. I believe there's been significant progress. We must keep it up, of course. You mentioned the 2022 deadline. Needless to say, we will rely on our parent company, on our network of partners, as I said before, on our European counterparts, and of course on the European Union, so we can achieve the best coordination in response to the challenges facing Africa. And that's how I think we will be most relevant. It's hard today not to mention the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's discuss solutions. Let's talk about the solution that Proparco provides to entrepreneurs. You have initiated a program called Resilience. Could you walk us through it? Absolutely. This crisis is unique. And at some point, we realized that a number of sectors were bearing the brunt of the crisis, such as tourism or transportation. Most importantly, we saw that some of the most vulnerable economic players were prime victims of the pandemic and its aftermath. And this meant that we needed to rescue our customers from the crisis. I said it before, but it bears repetition. Very quickly, we did our best to provide lifelines to our own customer portfolio. And we quickly realized that our response must be up to the task. And this is why we forged a number of coalitions, working together with our peers and other financial institutions and development stakeholders. And as far as we are concerned, we have decided to devote more than 1 billion euros in additional funds, thereby increasing the Choose Africa initiative from 2.5 billion to 3.5 billion euros. It's quite a feat. And this was possible thanks to support from the French government. Last summer, we were entrusted with a 160 million euro envelope, mainly in the form of securities. And thanks to a combination of leverage in our own initiatives, we'll be able to deploy an additional €1 billion. And that's nothing to sneeze at. Of course, we are going to devote this €1 billion to the players in sectors that have been hardest hit by the crisis, without forgetting the microfinance institutions, which work most closely with the most vulnerable players and also help to maintain jobs. The informal sector, for example, accounts for over 80% of jobs. Obviously, this depends on the country, but it is so important to be out there. And so we will also use part of these billions to support microfinance, which is a cornerstone of African economies. Well, thank you very much, Gregory, for reviewing so clearly and concisely the main thrusts of the Choose Africa program. If you'd like to know more about it, feel free to check out the website, which was set up at the very beginning of the project, chooseafrica.com. Since you mentioned your financial partners and said nothing could be done without them, I suggest talking to one of them right away.
Can you hear the managing director of Equity Bank?
Yeah.
And could you basically introduce us to Equity Bank?
Equity Bank is East and Central Africa's largest bank in terms of customer base, with 15 million customers, presence in 6 countries, and a rep office on Ethiopia. And it focuses principally on small and medium enterprises. 68% of the loan book is to micro and small enterprises.
Hello, Dr. Mwangi. Thank you for being with us today. Perhaps we could dive a little bit into the details. Equity Bank is the second largest bank in Kenya. Please tell us, maybe in a nutshell, what your strategy is towards SMEs.
SMEs are really the face of entrepreneurship in Africa. They provide a market for local goods and services, providing employment to community. And employ maybe 70% or create 70% of our employment in the continent. They also create opportunities for livelihood for the families that own these enterprises, and are a bridge to the transformation of Africa in the sense that they create wealth. As a result, we have chosen to focus on them because of the significant role they play on the African continent of supporting lives and livelihoods and helping stimulate economic activities that allow people to have opportunities and also allow the continent to accumulate wealth.
Sir, one of the goals of this show is to help the viewers understand how the funds are used. As you know, Proparco has granted a $100 million loan to Equity Bank. Could you tell us how you're using this money, perhaps to support SMEs in Kenya, and what impact this loan is going to have on your business?
Thank you very much. Let me deeply appreciate the support we have got from Proparco and AFD. There are two aspects to entrepreneurship support in Africa. One is capacity building, and this facility allows us as a component of capacity building. This capacity building is what most people call business development services. They help the entrepreneurs to improve in skills, competencies, and capacity in enhancing their participation in business. The second aspect is provision of credit. The biggest challenge that SMEs face in Africa is lack of sufficient credit. One, they are weak in terms of capital mobilization. Capital markets are not developed adequately to provide for them. So they leverage and rely more on debt. And equity, as we said, the 68% of our lending is to SMEs. But SMEs, unlike retail banking business, require medium and long-term loans for development, for expansion, for building up manufacturing plants. And these loans are required to be long-term. As a result, as a commercial bank, we don't have long-term loans. And Proparco's facility of 100 million have allowed us to lengthen the period to which we can give SMEs loans. That is the biggest contribution. The second contribution is Proparco gives us the facility in US dollars. So this loan then allows us to give SMEs that are doing cross-border trade and have their earnings or their revenues in dollars, long-term facilities, but also at lower rates because the inflation on dollarized loan factor is much lower than on local currency. So that makes the loans more affordable. It makes the SMEs to be more competitive as they do the cross-border trade and make the cost of their products much better. And lastly is the ability to strengthen the size of the balance sheet of Equity Bank in terms of our offering and strengthen the number of SMEs that we can support.
One final question, Dr. Mwangwi, and if possible, a concise answer. I know that you've conceived a very comprehensive plan to help SMEs to recover and to thrive in this, we hope, soon post-COVID environment. Can you please tell us more?
It is true that we have really analyzed the environment post-COVID, and we have realized COVID has had significant devastation beyond health. It has had a significant disruption of economic activities, resulting into humanitarian crisis, expressed mostly with unemployment. Most people have lost jobs, health issues, and lastly, the issue of poverty. And as a result, we have studied what globally governments have been able to do in their countries. But most of the governments in the region we operate in has no physical headroom to be able to do stimulus packages that can stimulate economic activities. And we realized as the leading bank, the largest bank in East and Central Africa, with a balance sheet of nearly $11 billion, we could be able to dedicate $4 billion to stimulate economic activities through the private sector. We are lucky that the region has signed up to the East African Community protocols that allows flow of goods and services within those countries. They have signed up to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And we thought we could be able to stimulate the recovery of this region by pushing the $4 billion to SMEs that particularly do cross-border trade, so that the market is much bigger and can support a large level of economic activities. So having deployed $4 billion, we felt we couldn't do it on our own. So we have approached the government to create an enabling policy environment, appropriate incentives where necessary. But the development banks come in as a big partner, and we are relying on Proparco, particularly for project financing. Part of the SMEs will be involved in projects, and we felt we could leverage on the capability of development banks led by Proparco in lengthening the period for which we could be able to provide these credit facilities. The second one is to create a mix of both local currencies and US dollar loans and euro loans to allow cross-border activities without taking the risk of the currencies. And lastly, it is capacity building. Credit is important, but it's not a sufficient condition to guarantee revival of economic activities in the region. And we felt we could partner with the development banks in pushing capacity building through business development services to the SMEs, while at the same time we leverage on guarantee credit risk sharing, guarantee and credit guarantee facilities for development banks. We are lucky we have talked to the UN agencies and the resident representative in the 6 countries, and they are committed to be part of this initiative. The African Development Bank also has signed in, and yesterday I had a very fruitful discussion with the head of the European Development Financial Institutions on putting them together so that it becomes a regional plan that transforms East Africa, but starts with the turnaround of the fortunes of the people, because we witness huge humanitarian crisis brought about by the disruption that has followed the health COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mangui, for sharing your experience and thoughts with us. Thank you very much. Merci aussi beaucoup, Grégory, d'avoir introduit cette émission. Vous reviendrez évidemment en conclusion.
Gregory, so you were here for the introduction of today's show, and you'll be back at the end to wrap everything up. So in the meantime, I think we should move on to Choose Africa Resilience. We've already spoken about it very quickly. This is an offer for Proparco. So Proparco, they provide loans and guarantees, but they also provide other tools that are adapted to the crisis.